What if you walked into a luxurious building, wearing shoes with worn-out heels and holding a manuscript bound with duct tape? Would anyone listen to you? She was once labeled a delusional single mother, laughed at by the very people sitting atop the publishing world. They threw her story into the trash without even reading the first page. But what they didn't know was that they had just rejected a dream that would one day change an entire generation. Watch this story to the end, and then tell me, if it were you, would you keep writing when the whole world told you to stop? The moment Grace Miller stepped into the grand lobby of Crownwell Publishing, the atmosphere shifted, not because she carried a masterpiece, but because she didn't look like success. Her wool coat was frayed at the cuffs, her canvas shoes worn thin, her hair tied back hastily with a rubber band. In one arm, she held a thick manuscript bound with brown duct tape, its pages yellowed and torn at the edges, as if even time itself had once doubted this dream. No one needed to ask who she was. A single glance from the receptionist was enough, not the look of a greeter, but that of a gatekeeper. The young woman behind the desk raised an eyebrow, smirked as if spotting a stain on the carpet. "You're really here to drop off a handwritten story? In ink? What century are you living in?" A man with slicked-back hair and a crimson tie stepped out from an office, glanced at the manuscript's title, and burst into laughter like he had just heard the punchline to a joke. A wizard living under the stairs? What is this, a sequel to Peter Pan? Laughter spread through the lobby like wildfire. An assistant picked up the manuscript with just 2 fingers, as though handling a dirty rag, shook his head in pity, and said, "The legend of the handwritten novel published in the trash." And right before her eyes, he tossed the manuscript to the floor like a crumpled flyer no one cared to read. Grace didn't react, not because it didn't hurt, but because she was used to slaps delivered through soft voices and polite smiles. She knelt down and gathered each page slowly, smoothing the creased corners like she was cradling pieces of her heart that had just been trampled. No words, no angristes, just a quiet nod. Calm, composed, yet powerful enough to make them feel like they were the ones being dismissed. What they didn't know was that what they had just thrown away would one day ignite the imagination of millions of children. And the woman they just looked down on would rewrite the world with the very story they mocked today. Grace Miller's apartment didn't need an alarm clock. The screech of a leaky pipe and the relentless traffic below had taken care of that long ago. It was a shabby attic above a fried fish shop, forever soaked in the smell of old grease, with walls stained yellow from dampness, windows patched with duct tape to block the draft, and a heater that wheezed like it was dying every night. Grace lived there with her 6-year-old daughter, Ella, a curly-haired little girl who slept on a worn-out mattress tucked into the corner of the room, just a few steps from her mother's writing desk. While the city still lay beneath the early morning mist, Grace would rise, steep some weak tea, spread butter on a slice of dry bread for Ella, and rush to get her to school on the earliest bus. There was nothing glamorous, no rosy dreams, only days that repeated in cycles of scarcity and stubborn willpower. But each time she returned to the cafe near the train station, to the old wooden table in the corner, where a cracked ceramic cup had become her silent companion, Grace would open her notebook, take out her familiar black ink pen, and begin to write. No one saw the magical world she was crafting. In her mind lived a boy named Harry. No one chose him, no one believed in him, but he chose himself. A boy who lived under the stairs, hidden in shadows, but carried something wondrous in his heart. Those pages weren't just stories. They were Grace's second life. A place where she could be herself, where sneers and ridicule couldn't reach her. Her clothes were still a faded sweater, a skirt stitched at the hem, shoes worn nearly through at the heels. But when her pen touched paper, she was no longer a poor single mother. She was the creator of a world where courage didn't require noble blood, where magic was born from a wounded heart. No one in the cafe knew that at that corner table, a miracle was being written, one word at a time, by the calloused hands of a woman the world had chosen to overlook. Grace wrapped her manuscript in brown paper, sealing every edge with care, as if wrapping a precious gift for a world that wasn't yet ready to receive it. She spent the last few coins in her wallet on stamps and mailed out 12 handbound copies, each one signed under the pen name E.G. Miller, hoping it might shield her, even slightly, from the deep-rooted biases in the publishing world. But the responses came quickly, cold and sharp as razors. The first letter from Crownwell Press began with, "Thank you for your submission, but magic is not meant for those who don't understand the real world." It was signed by Martin Hale, a veteran editor known for words that cut like nails into wood. The second response, from Pinnacle Books, was scrawled in red ink. "A woman writing about wizards? No thanks." Beneath it was Clara Voss's name, scribbled like a stamp of contempt. The third wasn't a letter at all. It was a photocopy of the first page of Grace's manuscript. In the margin, someone had written, "This writing style is more fitting for a preschooler's diary than a bookstore." It was stamped in shimmering gold by Simon Trent, a self-proclaimed creator of modern legends. Grace didn't cry. She folded each letter, slipped them back into their envelopes, and placed them in a wooden box under her bed, not to hide from them, but to remember them. Every rejection was a dagger to her dream, but also a hammer striking her resolve, engraving her will to never back down. She still returned to the cafe, still sat in her usual corner, writing in silence, writing amid the laughter of those who didn't understand, writing to survive, writing as though if she stopped, the world would lose all its color. One afternoon, while flipping through old books at the secondhand shop near her apartment, she heard giggling from the checkout counter. Clara Voss was standing there, boasting to the shop owner. "A single mother, dressed like a beggar, actually sent me a handwritten wizard story. I told my assistant to burn it." The story ended in laughter from the group, and someone chimed in. Probably just another failure looking to buy a little pity. They didn't know Grace was standing less than 10 feet away, her hands trembling slightly as she turned the pages of a worn paperback. Not from the cold, but from holding back tears so they wouldn't fall in front of people who didn't deserve to hear a single word from her. One rainy afternoon, Grace sat in her usual spot at the cafe. The same wooden table with a chipped corner, the same cheap coffee steaming faintly beside her, and her thick notebook laid open. Her pen had barely touched the page when the cafe door burst open. A gust of cold wind followed a group of young interns from Regent House, their laughter tearing through the silence. One of them spotted Grace, stopped mid-step, and whispered to the others, eyes gleaming with cruel amusement, "Look, the old handwritten, which is still alive." Laughter erupted. The young man walked over to Grace's table, glanced at her page, and smirked. "Still with the boy under the stairs? When's it coming out?" 2090. A girl beside him pulled an imaginary wand from her coat pocket and waved it dramatically. "Expecto Pitium." The group exploded with laughter, making no effort to lower their voices. One of them pulled out a phone and secretly snapped a photo of Grace as she hunched over her writing, then quickly posted it online with the caption, "Single mom and her failed Hogwarts dream." And it didn't stop there. The waitress brought Grace's coffee and set it down with a loud clunk, spilling it slightly. She sneered and muttered, "People like you just take up space with your silly dreams." Other customers turned to look, some with pity, others indifferent, as if watching an old, tired play. Grace didn't look up. Her pen trembled, a line of ink bleeding across the edge of the page, but she didn't tear it out. She kept writing, as if the outside world didn't exist. The humiliation couldn't reach the place where her dream lived. She knew she couldn't respond with words, because people who mock never truly listen. But she could respond with a story. She wrote to survive. She wrote to answer back. She wrote because someday, those very people laughing now would hold in their hands the book they once sneered at. Grace stood in front of the cold glass tower of Crownwell Press, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her manuscript, as if holding her own soul, stepping into a place built on layers of power and pride stacked thicker than the plush carpets inside. The office gleamed with chrome and glass, every surface polished to the point of reflecting back the smugness of those who worked within. As she entered, the assistants exchanged glances and smirks. One quietly pulled out their phone and began recording. Martin Hale emerged from the conference room, hair slicked to perfection, a purple silk tie draped too perfectly to be anything but insufferable. He glanced at Grace for precisely 1 second, his eyes traveling from her worn-out coat to the cracked shoes, then smirked. No greeting, no handshake. He pinched the manuscript between 2 fingers, as if afraid it might stain his freshly pressed cuffs, flipped through a few pages, and didn't read a single word. Looking her in the eye, he sneered. A single mother with a handwritten manuscript thinks she can create the next great legend? Who do you think you are, some knockoff Tolkien? Without waiting for a response, he tossed the manuscript into a gleaming steel trash can behind him, the motion swift and dismissive, like brushing away something that never mattered. Laughter erupted from the assistants around him. One whispered just loud enough for Grace to hear. "Go home, sweetheart. Still time to cook porridge for your kid." A girl chuckled so hard she choked, pretending to hold a broom. "Fly home on this, honey." Grace didn't reply. She only walked slowly to the trash can, bending down to collect the pages, as if gathering up the broken pieces of herself. With each page she picked up, her grip tightened. No tears, no cries. She stood upright and met Martin Hale's eyes just once. There was no begging, no hatred, only a calm so steady it made him look away, as if afraid he'd be scorched by her silence. As she turned and stepped into the elevator, a few assistants continued to laugh behind her. One girl in a red scarf said loudly, she should take up knitting instead of writing. A young man mocked her limp, dragging his feet in exaggerated steps. Another raised their phone for one last photo and posted, "Failed author leaving Crownwell after disaster of a pitch meeting." The elevator doors closed. Their laughter echoed inside, sharp as whips. Grace stood still, eyes locked on the metal walls reflecting her image. Thin coat, messy hair, arms still wrapped tightly around a manuscript now dusted with ashes. But in her eyes, there was no collapse, only a quiet promise that she would keep writing, until the very people who mocked her today would be forced to speak her name with respect. Winter descended upon the city like a cruel reminder that time waits for no one, especially not the poor. Grace had visibly lost weight. Her old coat was so threadbare it could no longer hold warmth, and her hands turned purple after every shift at the laundromat, where the few coins she earned were enough to buy Lily a new pair of shoes, but not food for herself. Inside the damp-walled room with windows sealed shut, Grace kept writing. She revised the same manuscript that had once been ridiculed, as if belief were the only thing she had left to feed her daughter each night. Then, on a bitterly cold afternoon, buried in a stack of crumpled junk mail at her door, she found a pale yellow envelope, a letter from a virtually unknown publisher, Willow Tree Press. It was handwritten, the letters slightly slanted with smudged ink. It came from Margaret Cole, who identified herself as the founder, editor, and janitor of her own company. "I'm not sure this is the book that will save us," she wrote, "but it kept me up at night. We'll print 1,000 copies as a trial. There's just one condition. You must sign as E.G. Miller. No one can know you're a woman." Grace sat frozen for a long time after reading it. Inside her, 2 storms clashed. One howled with rage, the other trembled with the fear of having no choice. She didn't write to be applauded. She didn't write for glory. She wrote so Lily could have textbooks, so their apartment could have electricity, and so her heart wouldn't die. And so, she signed 3 small letters that became the price of survival. E.G. Miller. The book was released quietly in early June. No marketing campaign, no posters in bookstore windows, just a small stack of paperbacks, a glass owl gliding through midnight on the cover, tucked into the corners of independent bookstores in London. Grace expected nothing. She still worked overtime, still wrote at the same cafe, still drank her thin coffee, her hope as faint as sugar that wasn't quite sweet enough. Until one day, she received a handwritten letter from a teacher named Patel in Leeds. "We read your book in class," it said. "The children won't stop talking about the boy named Harry. One of them cried when the owl shattered into light. Thank you for giving them a piece of magic." Grace's hands trembled as she held the letter. Her lips pressed tightly together, Her throat caught on something bigger than happiness and sorrow combined. She folded it carefully and placed it inside the old wooden box beneath her bed. But this time, it wasn't a wound. It was the first heartbeat of something alive. At first, the book was just a faint whisper in the storm of releases from the publishing giants. But then, something strange happened. At a small bookstore in Glasgow, the owner decided to host a rainy day reading for children. 10 chairs were set out. 30 children showed up. Their eyes were fixed on the pages as Harry touched the glass owl for the first time. A shy little girl stepped forward and asked, "Do you have book 2?" And just like a pebble dropped into a still lake, the ripples began to spread. A teacher in Birmingham shared a passage from book. The quote, "The boy who wasn't chosen chose himself," received over 100 shares in one night. A boy in Sydney recorded a video of himself pretending to be Harry, battling a shadow in the mirror, cardboard owl wings fluttering as if alive. The video went viral. More stories followed. A little girl in a hospital in Dublin held the book through her chemotherapy. A photo of her smiling, gripping Harry Potter and the glass owl was posted online and made thousands cry. In New York, a single father wrote that for the first time in years, his daughter asked him to read with her every night. In Paris, students drew the glass owl on their notebooks as a symbol of hope. In Tokyo, a bookstore in Shinjuku sold out 500 copies in 2 hours. A young blogger wrote, "I don't know who E.G. Miller is, but this book makes me want to live better." No ads, no marketing campaign, just children passing Harry's name to one another like a secret guarded by love. By the time the big publishing houses realized what was happening, it was too late. The woman they once called a housewife writing delusions had written a legend with the very hands they once mocked. Willow Tree Press, once on the brink of collapse, received thousands of orders. The printing press ran through the night. Margaret Cole called Grace in the middle of the night, her voice shaking with emotion. "We need to print 10,000 more. They want to know who the author is." "Grace, you've done what no one believed was real." Grace sat frozen in her tiny kitchen. Lily had fallen asleep over her homework. The yellow lamplight glowed on her mother's notepad. Next chapter, Harry enters the School of Dreams. She smiled, her hand tightening around the pen, not because of success, but because the story the world once tossed away was finally being heard with all the love it was written with. And that was the real victory. The National Literary Gala was held at the Lancaster Hotel, an event where only the most celebrated names were ever invited. Gowns adorned with jewels, tuxedos pressed to mirror-like perfection. The doors opened only for the elite of publishing, where forced laughter played like background music to bloated egos. Grace stood outside, wearing a pale blue linen dress bought from a thrift store. Her hair was still in natural curls, unstyled. Her shoes had patch soles, just so they wouldn't squeak when she walked. In her hands, a notebook and a pen, not for autographs, but to remember what truly mattered. As she entered, no one recognized her. They brushed past her as if she were a shadow. Martin Hale stood near the bar in an expensive suit, laughing as if he hadn't once thrown someone's manuscript in the trash. Clara Voss, now a half-fallen editor, still wore her red gown, but her eyes no longer held confidence. Simon Trent was glued to his phone, unaware that the world was about to shift. Then, the host's voice echoed through the grand hall. And now, the highest honor for global literary impact this year, awarded to a work once rejected more than any other, a book that changed how children read, revived a dying publisher, and opened a new universe of imagination. Please welcome E.G. Miller, whose real name is Grace Harper. Silence. A glass fell and shattered. Gasps. Hearts dropped, especially those of the people who had once mocked her. Grace walked up to the stage, the spotlight catching her face, calm, gentle, just like the woman who once sat in the corner of a forgotten cafe. No diamonds, no feathers, just a woman once dismissed as a delusional single mom, now standing at the center of the world. She placed her hand on the microphone. Her eyes swept across Martin, Clara, and Simon, one by one. Not with hatred, not with fury, just a quiet steadiness that left them exposed under the lights. I didn't come here to revisit the past, she said. I came to say thank you, not to those who believed in me, but to those who ridiculed me. Because without your contempt, I might never have kept writing. Had I not been thrown out like a nameless ghost, Harry might never have been born. The entire hall held its breath. I didn't write to stand on this stage. I wrote for my daughter, and for every child out there who's ever been forgotten, ever been told, your dream isn't big enough. But children, your silence was the real magic. A single clap broke the stillness, then another, and another, until thunderous applause shook the chandelier. Readers rose to their feet, tears streaming. A 12-year-old girl in a Harry Potter cloak held up her copy and shouted, "I choose myself," and the world erupted. The next morning, social media exploded with images of Grace on stage, her face glowing with joy, still humble and unadorned. Articles flooded in. The woman publishing rejected, now the heart of global literature. And Martin Hale, Clara Voss, and Simon Trent, their pasts were unearthed. Their actions are condemned. They were exposed for using power to silence a miracle. Cromwell Press faced a massive boycott. Pinnacle Books' stock plummeted. Simon's reputation in literary circles collapsed completely. But Grace never looked back. When the gala lights dimmed, she returned to her corner cafe. In front of her, a black coffee and a blank notebook, already opened. Lily sat beside her, coloring in the glass owl. And Grace kept writing, not for revenge, but to plant seeds of hope. And the world now not only read her story, but lived inside it. Grace Harper's story reminds us, being underestimated does not mean you are worthless. She didn't seek revenge with words. She answered with a world that moved millions of hearts. The message is clear. If you believe in your dream, never let anyone silence you. Subscribe to Toch Story to keep following more powerful, soul-stirring stories just like this one.